All right, and so now let's talk about vacuoles. Vacuoles, we mentioned a few times already that vacuoles are this huge organelle right here in the center of the cell, or a little bit off to the side, right? So in a plant cell, it's a lot easier when you look at this through a microscope to see the vacuole than to see the nucleus, and you can see why. Well, it depends on how much fluid the cells have in them, right? So a plant cell has this large central vacuole, and no vacuoles in bacterial cells, and some animal cells do have these, but they're not quite as large as the central vacuole in a plant cell. And so it is this fluid sac right here, and it is for storage. And so it's like I said, it's either if it is present in an animal cell, it is going to be very small, right? So a lot of times when we think of these, we mostly just think of them in the plant cell, right? So my bad. So these vacuoles right here, and here you see actually under a microscope what this would look like. And in this case, the plants, they will actually store what they call cell sap in there. And this cell sap includes things like sugars, proteins, minerals, lipids, waste, salt, water, and enzymes. And so it's kind of like a soup with a whole bunch of different ingredients in there, right? But one of the things that you'll notice is when you do have when it is full right here, it does allow the cells to kind of the inside of the cell to put pressure on the cell walls. And again, that's what allows a plant, when it has enough water, it will be standing upright and it will look perky. But if it does not have water and it is lacking this right here, then these cell walls will be pushed inward and they'll kind of cave in. And that's what makes a plant look shriveled up when it is thirsty, right? When it does not have water. So lysosomes are pretty cool. They do a lot of good. You see right here, they have digestive enzymes, but these guys right here, they do a lot of good for our body. What they do, what their function is to break down food, bacteria, and worn out cells or parts for our cells. And so I kind of think of them as almost like the decomposers of the ecosystem, right? They kind of break down things that aren't really working anymore, or that shouldn't really be around. And so there's something called programmed uh, cell death, right? And our cells, they have a life cycle. They live, they're created, they live, they carry out their functions, and then eventually they die, right? And so they are programmed to eventually die off. And so autolysis just means that it's just programmed for a cell to lyse or to burst, and lyse, yeah, like I said, right, burst or break open, right? And when it does that, it releases what it breaks down whatever it is that isn't really working anymore or that can be harmful to our body, right? So it breaks open and releases enzymes to break down and recycle cell parts, which again is very good for us, right? Because it gets rid of the things that aren't really working anymore. And so, y'all, this has happened over millions of years of evolution, right? That all of these little parts come together, all these organelles come together to do uh, serve functions that help us to survive, right? And so here you see lysosome digestion. Cells take in food by phagocytosis. And so there's something called phagocytosis, which is again taking in solids or food. There's something called penocytosis, which is taking in liquid. And we'll talk about that when we talk about cell transport. But right here, this is a really cool image, a cool GIF right here. You see that this cell is chasing around a foreign, something that shouldn't be in the body, right? And so it kind of chases it down. It ends up swallowing it through a phagocytosis, and the lysosomes digest it and break it down so that if this was harmful to our body, it's not anymore because it's been broken down by lysosomes. Right. And so now back to chloroplasts, right? So remember, chloroplasts are organelles that you will only find in plant cells. We can also refer to plants as producers or autotrophs, right? Organisms containing chlorophyll that make food from sunlight, right? They use that energy from the sunlight and they make food, which is glucose, which are sugars, right? And that's the only way that we as animals can be alive on this planet, is because the plants actually do the awesome job of converting sunlight into sugar, which we can then turn into energy for ourselves. Energy from the sun is stored in those chemical bonds of the sugar. So when you think about it, it is kind of not kind of, it is really cool to know that plants turn sunlight into chemical energy, right? And in the form of sugars. And so chloroplasts are surrounded by this double membrane right here. So let me kind of move this down right here. And here you see this double membrane. There's one membrane right there, and then the other one is in this inner part. And so the outer membrane is a smooth membrane, but the inner membrane right here, it's modified into sacs called thylakoids. Right. So here you see it looks like a stack of coins or a stack of pancakes, right? You can think of it that way too. But yeah, these are the thylakoids, these stacks right here. And the thylakoids and the stacks are called grana, right? So when they're all just stacked up like this is what is known as a granum. But when you have multiple stacks, it's grana, right? But again, granum is a stack of thylakoids right here. And this is a stack. Stroma is kind of like the cytoplasm. It's a gel-like material surrounding the thylakoids. So it's all this semi-fluid in here, right, in the inner region of this chloroplast. And what's really cool, y'all, about this chloroplast is it's kind of like how I was mentioning the mitochondria, organelle. It was a cell in and of itself, but then a larger cell came and ate it. And because the chloroplast provided a very valuable service for that larger cell, right, making food out of sunlight, the larger cell was like, well, I am going to keep this chloroplast here because it's providing food for me. And then the chloroplast got protection. It got shelter from the outside environment by that larger cell. And so they both kind of benefit. There was that mutualism there where the, again, cell was getting food and this chloroplast right here was getting shelter inside of that larger cell. They call that the endosymbiotic theory. And so it is just basically saying that um, that they provided a service for each other, and so they kept that relationship. So here you see a chloroplast, and kind of like mitochondria, this also has its own DNA, right? Which is really cool because it kind of backs up that endosymbiotic theory that it was its own cell at one point. Right? It contains enzymes and pigments for photosynthesis. So enzymes we've talked about before. Pigments is just basically colors, right? And they use this for photosynthesis. Never in animal cells or bacterial cells. So again, if we had these in our cells, we would be green. We do not have these. We are not green. But I don't know. That might be a good trade-off, being green but being able to make food out of sunlight. Yeah, your grocery bills would be a lot cheaper. And so photosynthesis is food making process. Again, turning sunlight into sunlight energy into chemical energy. And so, and I apologize, my dog is snoring in the background, but cell size. When the surface area is no longer great enough to get rid of all the waste and to get in enough food and water, then the cell must divide, right? So there is a certain sweet spot between the surface area of the cell. If a cell gets too big, things cannot move in and out of the cell fast enough to keep the cell alive. So once it gets too big, then it's time for that cell to divide. Therefore, the cells of an organism are close in size, right? So our cells would not be, and you got to ask yourself, like, well, why are we not just like one giant cell? If we were just one giant cell, our cell could not get things in and out of the cell fast enough to keep us alive, right? So it is good that our cells are this certain size because that's how they've evolved to be as efficient as they are.